You're listening to the Deep End Podcast, a ministry of Hermitage Church, where we have a conversation about Sunday's sermon and chat about ways we can go a little deeper in our faith. I'm Hunter Steinmetz, and I'm one of the pastors here at our church. Every week, we will listen in on a conversation with the preacher from this week about deeper theological pieces of the sermon and suggested practices on how we can embody this word and allow it to seep into our skin. We hope that this podcast will become a part of your weekly faith journey on your drive into work, as you do the dishes, or as you sip your coffee on Tuesday mornings. Thanks for jumping into the deep end with us. Let's listen in on this week's conversation. Welcome to the Deep End Podcast, where we kind of get ahead of the sermon on Sunday. I am Hunter.
And I'm Brad, and this is week 5 of our series, A Church That Grows. Today we're stepping back to the foundational story of Scripture, Genesis chapters 1 through 12. We're asking as a guiding question, what kind of people is God forming? What kind of church is God calling us to be?
Yeah, and if you've been following this series really at any level, you know that we've been talking about growth, church growth through church planting, and how God is preparing us to be a people that join in that mission. So this week we're focusing on multiplication, and not just in numbers, but in impact and presence and in obedience. And what we want to suggest is that the story of Genesis chapters 1 through 12 is not just our origin story, but that is a theological framework for what it means to live faithfully and expand God's purposes in the world. So let's start right at the beginning. Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 28. After creating humanity, God blesses them and says, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." And God is inviting humans into his creative work. He wants his image bearers to expand the borders of Eden, to fill the earth with goodness, justice, and beauty. This is not so much about like rulership or dominion. It's more about stewardship, that we would be the ones to take care of it. It's creating a flourishing world where God dwells with his people and his people with God.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that this call to multiply isn't just isolated to Genesis 1:28, but it's repeated even after the flood. In Genesis 9:1, God blesses Noah and his sons and says, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." The same kind of proclamation to humanity is echoed again here. And this is kind of like a reboot. God is saying, even after the world has fallen into violence and corruption, the mission hasn't changed. The purpose hasn't changed. The world still needs to be filled with the presence of God through people who carry his image, carry God's image into the world.
And it's interesting because even in the flood narrative in the beginning of it, the way that they understood like how the earth was, it talks about when the flood is beginning, that the windows of heaven, or the fountain, the windows of heaven opened and the fountains of the earth exploded, that there was water coming in from everywhere. And what we find on day 2 in the creation narrative is that God separates the waters from the waters. And he leaves some of the water up in the sky and some of the water down below. And so in this flood narrative, the waters are unseparated, and it's as if God is decreating in the same orderly fashion that he created. And then afterwards, the windows are closed, the fountains are plugged. I don't know, that's not the Hebrew word. But there's a creation in Genesis 1, there's a decreation, and then there's a kind of a recreation. And so after this recreation, when the waters begin to recede, you get it again.
Yeah.
Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So twice now, and a couple more times in between those, that it's not the full be fruitful, multiply. Sometimes it's just fruitful or multiply. God commissions humanity to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. He commissions them to scatter, to fill, to multiply. But then by the time that we get into Genesis 11, something has shifted. The people on the plains of Shinar decide that they have a better idea. So let me read from Genesis chapter 11, 1 through 4. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its tops in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So here's the problem. God calls people to scatter, to fill the earth. But what do? They circle the wagons. They cluster. They try to contain what they have and to make a name for themselves. Instead of multiplying outward, they are consolidating inward. And their reason is crystal clear, because otherwise we shall be scattered. It's as if they know what God has asked them to do, and they are deliberately resisting the very thing that God has called them to do.
Yeah, that story is always intriguing. And it's not that they were trying to build a city. It's that they were trying to kind of grasp onto control, trying to grasp onto security for their future apart from God. That's the big piece. It's the interesting language in both of in that passage. We will make a name for ourselves. We will do this.
Yeah, let us build ourselves. It's for us. The city is for us.
Yeah, and that the tower becomes kind of a monument to self-sufficiency, a structure of fear or refusal to trust that God's mission is good, which we often can do similar things today. I'm sure if you let your imagination run, there's a lot of things we hold on to out of fear or try to do out of self-sufficiency. And how does God respond in this passage? He confuses their language and scatters them across the earth, which, ironically, is exactly what kind of Genesis talked about. And then after the flood was talked about to go, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it.
Yeah, and this isn't God being petty. This is God actually protecting the mission of the world and of humanity. That if the people are not going to fill the earth willingly, if they're not going to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth willingly, then God will move them so that they will do that. The mission does not stop. And then when you turn the page into Genesis chapter 12, God does not abandon humanity there. Instead, he calls a man named Abram, and he makes him a promise. And he says, "Now, Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed."
And this is kind of, if you are tracking with the narrative and you go back and kind of move through Genesis, this part of the story is kind of like a hinge that moves us into a really a pivotal shift in the Bible. Humanity in the beginning rejected the mission. So God chooses one family kind of in this micro way to carry it forward. Abraham and Sarah becomes the means by which God continues his plan to bless and fill the earth. And what's really unique is that everything from this point forward, Israel, Jesus, the church, all flows from this Genesis 12 moment.
And when you look at this, these two stories literarily, what I mean by that is remove the theology. Well, it's all theology, but when you are really paying attention to the way that the literature is operating, in Genesis 11, they're telling a story about a people who do not fulfill the mission of God. And the people who are not fulfilling the mission of God are the people who are saying, we're going to build something for ourselves that is so great that the rest of the world will be like, wow, look at how great they are. They don't need anyone else's help in creating a name for themselves. They are the ones who will make themselves great. And what we find in Genesis 12 is when God contacts Abram and says, I need you to leave everything that you know.
It's like E.T.
E.T., yes, phone home. And exactly. Now, that was totally from left field. But he's leave everything that you know, and when you get there, I'll show you, basically. But for the people who are in the Tower of Babel narrative, they have everything they need. They're completely self-sufficient. And what God is asking Abram to do is, I need you to be fully dependent on me. Leave everything that you have and that you know and go to a new place. And I will be the one that makes your name great. And not just, this isn't just like what is it? The ends justify the means. Where, like, as long as you go through God, your name will be great. Because the purpose of what God says, I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. It is not just so that he can have a great name. But it's a tale of two names, one that wants to make its own name great and build its own empire, and then one who submits to the God who was going to take him to somewhere new. And the people from the Tower of Babel narrative, their name is not, they have no name. They're just the Tower of Babel people. Their name was not made great, even though they told the story. But we know Abraham's name. So let's totally bring this home and kind of land it in church planting. When we talk about church planting, we're not talking about strategy. We're talking about joining in on a story that goes back to Genesis 1, that God is still calling his people to be fruitful, to multiply, and to fill the earth. He's still calling his people to scatter, to fill, to multiply, and to bring his image into new places. And so the question becomes, will we be a Genesis 11 church that wants to make a name for itself, to consolidate into the middle, maybe out of fear, maybe out of self-sufficiency, or will we choose to be a Genesis 12 church that goes to the land that God will show us, where God is going to give us the name that will be a blessing? Are we going to build towers and monuments that make a name for ourselves? Or are we going to trust that the blessing of God comes through obedience, risk, and sending?
Yeah. A Genesis 11 church says something kind of like, let's stay, let's protect what we've built, let's make a name for ourselves. And a Genesis 12 church, on the flip side of that, says, let's go, let's bless others, let's trust God to grow something beyond us, which echoes back to the Genesis passage, back to the Noah passage of people who are called to go and be fruitful, to multiply to the ends of the earth, as the text would say, but in many communities all over the world.
Yeah, I think that it's very easy for us to be like, oh yeah, we're the Genesis 12 church, because the Tower of Babel people were just bad people. But if we could contextualize what it means to be that people today, it's more like, are we sure we have enough money for this? Do we have enough resources? We might need to consolidate and get closer together rather than going out. And that does not happen in Scripture. God is always telling us to go. And so if we can contextualize the Tower of Babel people, the Genesis 11 church, I think that's a church that is suspicious of going, suspicious of multiplying, that maybe that's not the best thing.
Yeah.
And so it then begs the question, or makes us realize that God's mission is going to go forward either way. The only question is whether we are going to participate through obedience and resistance. Because, again, the Tower of Babel people knew what would happen. They said, let's do this. Otherwise, God might scatter us. Whether we go willingly or whether we have to be scattered because we're not doing the thing that God has asked us to do. And we're aware that that's what God has asked us to do.
Yeah.
But what if we chose to be a Genesis 12 people? What if we chose to go and actually partner with God instead of God making us do this? What if we said yes to multiplication, yes to sacrifice, yes to letting go of control so that something greater could grow?
Yeah, and that's the kind of direction of a church that grows, not just bigger, not just larger, but a church that is deeper, not just more programs, but more planting and more trust and more leaning into the Spirit, a church that gives itself away because it believes God will multiply the seeds. And I think it's a church, too, that even moves away from some of the questions, what if we don't have enough? And even turns those questions into prayers of, Lord, how will you surprise us? Because if God's in this, then there's no stopping of what power could be released, of what resources could open up, of who might come along and help. But I think it's turning some of those questions that could come out of fear into kind of eyes that are trying to see where God is at work.
It's interesting too. Even as you say that, I'm thinking about how the dominion of like the humans are supposed to rule over creation. That that we're to be good stewards of the creation, and it's almost like God's directive of stewardship is not make sure you save enough in your bank account. That God's understanding of stewardship is to
Give.
be fruitful,
Yeah.
to multiply, and fill the earth. That as like to have dominion over the earth. God's understanding of stewardship is not make sure you have enough in your cooler before you go out for the hike today. It's more so be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And God will supply all of those things on the way. That if not, we are not trusting God to do the thing that God said that He would do. So shame on us if we are unwilling to believe that God will actually do what He said He would do.
Yeah.
And we tell Him we're too afraid because it might not work. So I would offer, I think we would both offer, that we should really pay attention to what Abram does. I mean, he really doesn't even respond. He just gets up and goes. God says, I need you to leave everything that you know, everything that makes you feel safe, everything you've ever known, get up and go to somewhere else. And he says, okay, I'll go. And because of that, Abram and his line, his family, have indeed been a great blessing to the earth. So may that end up being our church's story, that we followed the call of God into a land that we were unsure of and did not know. But all the ways that God provided for Abram, He will do the same for us, and we have to hold on to that and believe that.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us today, and we're praying for you and hope that you might share this so that more people can pray for what God is doing in this community. We'll see you Sunday.